Hi there! This is Hannah Rubenstall, the crafter here at Fanciful Spaces. Today I am doing a project for Rita Bearcat. I am playing with her die-cut ephemera. To get started, this is just a wooden board. I venture to guess it measures about 9 inches by 1.5 feet, maybe. There's nothing special about this board. I got it at my local upcycle shop, and I based it white because I didn't, want it to seep in all of the paint, and I wanted a nice surface. And I am scumbling on some paint on top of it. I am doing a wet scumble where there are like colors, meaning those colors haven't dried, and I'm just like painting into each other. And you can see here where it's not a like color, where I might create mud, or I didn't want to damage the inherent quality of that color that I was getting. I dried the previous layers. What this is going to do is establish more or less a background set of colors for me to work off of, and it's going to ultimately allow me to have a lot of depth in my project. This is some folk art black paint. Right now, I realized how opaque it was. It was way more opaque than the other plaid April barrel paints that I was using, and I was not quite prepared for it. So I had to remove some. So I applied the paint on, I removed some. I'm adding a whole lot of water because you need water for this magical step, where I am splattering on some denatured alcohol, and the denatured alcohol acts as a resist to the water that it lands on. And if there's pigment in that water, it pushes that pigment away and allows for a really organic look to happen to it. Here, while I was working, my paintbrush totally broke. What it was the glue had failed on my brush. The result is now I chucked the brush, even though I could have re-glued it on with some E6000. But the stick I was using, I'm just using to help splatter with things. It was just a funny moment when I was crafting. I was like, what the? So this is some of the color shift paint. I love Plaid's new color shift paint because it is shiny and it really is reactive to the light. If you turn it, you get different colors to feel like they appear depending on how you how they pick up in the light. So I also did that with my denatured alcohol. And then I'm just going in, a few areas needed to be a little bit darker to me. And so I'm mostly focusing on those with the color shift paint. The really cool thing about this project, or this technique, is the more layers you do, the more depth you get, the more intricacies to the project. So I need a little moon in this project. We'll talk about that shortly. But in order to create the little moon, I took a compass, made an arc, and then along where that seam was, I took some 3M Post-it tape to sturdy up that arc, because that piece of paper, because I'm going to use both the positive, the moon, and the negative, the space part of that paper multiple times in this project, and I just wanted the paper to hold up. So I don't want anything glittery to be where the moon is, specifically nothing of texture for this project, and that's exactly what this is that I'm putting on. This is some more paint by folk art paint by Plaid, and it's basically got a clear sealant and glitter in it. That glitter made me think of stars, and I super love anything shiny. So it was just one little step, and that's why I was masking out where the moon was going to be, because I didn't want any of the texture from that paint to get to where I was working at. So here I am using the negative portion of my stencil that I basically made, and this is some folk art white paint. You can see how like opaque and thick this paint is. It's like a dream to work with. And when I pick up this masking, you'll see there's some sploosh on the other underneath it. I loved it. I was immediately like, hello, crater. I was terribly excited about it. So this is some spray Mod Podge sealant. I believe it comes in 2 different finishes, a matte and a glossy. I did glossy, and you can see here I sprayed it twice because I wanted a super shiny finish. And I wasn't overall pleased. It just felt, the whole thing felt really flat. So I'm taking some Lindy's sprays and I'm spraying them over the whole project a little bit just to add some more dimension and depth to everything. I think that was what made it work really well for me, because you could still see the colored paint from the very first steps. You can see all of that black texture that I got. And now you get these blobs, this fine mist of color going on everywhere. I just loved it. I did spray everything over with some more of that Mod Podge sealer. The Lindy sprays will react to paint, to anything wet basically, and like absorb into anything water-based. And I'm splattering stars on, and one of the things that's going to happen here, even though I had sprayed finishing stuff down, that Lindy spray is going to absorb into some of these paint splatters, so it's going to make the stars look as if they're shining through the gases of a galaxy. It's not going to be immediate. It'll happen over the next 20 minutes, and it's a fabulous step. I super duper loved it. But now, doesn't that look like maybe space or galaxy? I think it does. So, the sentiment for the project is make some time for play today. And that's literally what I was doing here. Was the whole point of this project was to paint this moon. I have a bigger project in mind, something that I'm afraid to do because it's so large, and making the moon look good is super important, that I'm literally just using this as an experiment to paint a moon and to see what works and doesn't work for me. Oftentimes, if you have something white, it gets scary because you don't know where to start. Writers often face this at the very beginning of their page. So that's literally why I just painted some gray down, was that whole white blob was scaring me and I didn't know what to do with it. So I just painted it gray, and it's just this little mind trick that works really, really well to all of a sudden it's not pristine and pure and it's not scary. The technique that I'm doing now is called stippling. I'm taking just the tips of my paintbrush into my paint, and I'm dabbing it onto my moon. And what that does is give me a heck of a lot of texture. I am going to do multiple steps on this moon. It's not just going to be one layer. The really great thing about the stippling is that it's going to show and allow all of those different layers to happen, to show through. It's not a blanket over the project. There's lots of little windows to peek through different layers to see different things that are going on. And I am going to do this until my moon looks good to me. Until it looks moon-like and it doesn't look like butt, because this is what I'm really afraid, is that this focal point will look like butt. And that's the really cool thing about mixed media, is you just keep doing a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer until you get to what you want to do, basically. So I'm going to jump ahead here. I think it's a good time in the video to jump ahead. So this is a Rita Bearcat ephemera die cut that I'm using. In the Rise and Shine group, I had actually asked which die cut I should use. This was weeks ago. They were paired with some of the some quotes. I chose the quotes primarily because I liked them, but also because the paper that they were printed on worked well color-wise with the ephemera. And the group more or less chose this fairy for me. There were a few votes for some of the other stuff, but overwhelmingly everyone wanted to see the veil of the fairies that I was working on. So she's got this large white area in there, and it just felt like it would detract from the whole project. So I am taking an X-Acto knife and I am trimming that white area off around her. And not only am I going to do it to this fairy, but I'm also going to do it to a second fairy. I happen to have two of the same fairies. And once that white area is trimmed out, I'm going to take a Copic marker, a gray Copic marker, and I'm just going to hit the white lines that are all around her, just to tone them back just a little bit, because I just felt like that brought way too much attention to the fairy, that white line. Literally nothing else in this picture is white. Even those stars are tinted a different color. So what I'm going to ultimately do, and unfortunately I don't have this on my video, is I'm going to adhere one fairy down onto the board, and then I'm going to take some foam tape and attach it to her and lay another fairy directly on top of her. And this is going to give the appearance of 3 dimensions, even though it isn't. It's going to make what I felt was going to be a bland and boring scene and turn it into something a little bit more dynamic. And I didn't like the plain rectangle of the quote, the inspirational card that I was using. Fortunately, I have these really teeny tiny hexagon dies from Tonic Studios, and I was able to get 5 cuts out of that little inspirational card, including the larger one for the sentiment. And I felt like this was just a more interesting way to display that, to make it look less plain and less static. The adhesive that I'm using is from 3L, scrapbook adhesives. And it's a double-sided tape, and it worked really well. I like it a lot. I did end up using lots of Mod Podge here, you'll see coming up, to seal around those corners, because I didn't want any peeling up of my paper. I wanted it inside my project, not sitting on top of it. So I did not get rid of that mask of that moon. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit of masking to that little crater, because I'm going to be covering it all with some more shiny Mod Podge, and I do not want my moon to be shiny at all. So this is some spray Mod Podge I used earlier in this project, and it's fabulous because it allows for, it helps remove any of those paintbrush marks that you might get. It comes in 2 separate finishes, I believe, matte and shiny. And so I did just a base coat of spraying all over this. Some of my Lindy's does absorb into this, and that's fine. That just added more depth and layer to the project. But my project wasn't shiny enough, so I took some ultra gloss Mod Podge, and I am coating, I don't know why I think space is shiny. I'm coating everything here, minus the moon, in this super shiny Mod Podge. I'm also making sure that I hit along the edges of the paper of that sentiment stuff, because I wanted to seal those edges really, really well. You can see on my moon on the left-hand side, there's a darker layer that looks a little bit funkier than the rest of it. And that's going to be the shadow of my little girl, of my fairy. I wanted it to stand out and be a little bit different than the rest of the moon. I wanted it to appear as if, you know, she's facing into the sun and she's got her little parasol and she's just gallivanting and frolicking on the moon. And so that's why that bit of black look doesn't fit in with the rest of the moon look. Hopefully it works. Hopefully it doesn't. I don't know. All right. I hope you have enjoyed the project and watched this process video, as it were. Please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel if I inspired you. And also make sure to hop on over to Rita Bearcat's Etsy page, because she's got so many die cuts that are really fun to play with and really great jumping points for imagination. All right, I hope you have a great day. Thank you for watching with me.